Let's bring in Greg Simmons, who is an associate professor at the Institute for Russian and Eurasian Studies at Uppsala University, and he joins us now live. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us on the program today. Now, we're getting a sense of optimism from both Russia and Ukraine going into a fresh round of negotiations today. We heard Lavrov say that there is some room to compromise. Should we be hopeful at all for some sort of breakthrough to happen?
My optimist in me says yes. The fact that they're still talking, even though nothing has been concretely agreed upon yet, they are still talking, and there are the beginnings of the talk of compromise from both sides. This is a healthy step, and it hopefully demonstrates that there is some cooling of tempers and then coming down to the reality of the costs of this war and to step back from it.
Russia says that a military model similar to Sweden's and Austria's is ideal for Ukraine to keep its neutrality in the region. And we heard from Zelensky say that he's lost hope in becoming a member of NATO, and that won't happen moving forward, especially having this conflict happening in his country. How do you analyze these recent remarks that we're hearing from both sides?
Well, I mean, this is part of this dialogue, and they're sending messages out to each other. On the one hand, there's this message that's concrete part of this Russian demand was that Ukraine is not to be in NATO. And given this conflict, if it was to somehow become part of NATO, of course, that increases the collective insecurity, because how would Russia react to that? You don't solve the problem. So there seems to be an attempt to try and find this model which is acceptable to both sides, giving Ukraine some guarantees of non-interference and yet giving Russia those security assurances that it's after.
Right, and there has been a back and forth exchange of sanctions between the EU and Russia this week. We saw the EU slap its fourth round of sanctions on Russia yesterday, and Russia earlier in the week put sanctions on about 200 commodities into the EU and into the West. And we're now hearing the Kremlin say that there will be personal sanctions on leaders that are unfriendly countries. What do you think that would look like?
Well, I mean, it's going to be a ramping up of what is happening now. I mean, what I see most clearly, I mean, this is a decoupling of Russia from Western institutions and Western ties. I mean, it's left the Council of Europe, for example. So the sanctions is not going to be something that deters Russia or changes its behavior, because what is signaling it's beyond that. And you can see that this is mainly going between Russia and the Western bloc, those Western-centric countries which are allied to the US, whereas China, India, a lot of the non-Western world is either sitting on the fence or tacitly supporting Russia.
Right, and there's also another growing crisis resulting from this conflict, of course, being the humanitarian crisis. The UN has reported that at least one child is being displaced every single second in Ukraine, and they're running short on aid and food, both at the border and across the country. Very dire situation, and this problem on its own is going to lead to a humanitarian catastrophe. What does the international community need to do to avert a bigger problem?
Well, I think it's not saying, putting it in the language that a humanitarian catastrophe could happen. A humanitarian catastrophe is happening. It's a matter of trying to encourage Ukraine and Russia to reach these compromises in order to end this. It's in everyone's interests that this is ended, and that the likelihood of this happening again is greatly diminished, because at the current state, I mean, there does not seem to be this end, but rather a perpetual kind of throwing some oil on this fire. And there is a need to cool these tempers down and start re-establishing dialogue. I mean, even if you do not agree with the other side, at least the other sides should understand each other as a part of the de-escalation process.
Okay, Professor Greg Simmons, it was a pleasure speaking to you here on the NewsHour. Thank you.